and water security, representing the Leader of the Opposition, panel members, panel facilitator, and all guests joining us this morning. An event like this would not be possible without our partners. Thank you to our webinar sponsor, Oricon, and Alice Springs Hub partner, Acustica. I think we've all heard this a lot, but please be mindful of our COVID-safe guidelines throughout the breakfast, maintaining physical distancing where possible and personal hygiene. I have a script. I didn't write this. So you may have noticed there is no table service for tea and coffee this morning. Please help yourselves from the hot drink station in the foyer throughout the morning. I would also like to acknowledge the association's principal members and the support they provide the association throughout the year. Some of our principal member organisations are here today. Thank you for joining us. The Q&A session will be conducted via Slido, so you can type a question for the panellists or upvote an existing one that you'd like the panellists to answer. So you would have received a text message, which I did here through the room. So please also remember to turn your phones to silent. I would now like to introduce Honourable Selena Uibo from the NT Government. Minister Uibo is the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Minister for Essential Services, Minister for Housing and Homelands, and the Minister for Renewables and Energy, Treaty and Local Decision Making. There's quite a list there. Having completed a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education at the University of Queensland, Minister Uibo was a teacher in the remote community of Ngumbulwar before entering politics. Minister Uibo was first appointed as Minister in 2018. She loves the Territory and is proud to be able to work to improve the lives of all Territorians. Please join me as we welcome the Honourable Selena Uibo. Thank you.
I get to move the mic up. Often I'm moving it down, so I feel quite tall this morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honour and privilege to be invited to the Northern Territory's water breakfast for this year. And what a privilege to be able to follow Auntie B with her welcome to country to this beautiful Larrakia, country that's been looked after for thousands of generations by the Larrakia custodians. So as you've heard, I'm not the Minister responsible for environment or water security, so it's a bit odd to be standing here with a different set of portfolios, but the exciting opportunity that I have before me with the portfolios that I hold, I think is really exciting in terms of what we can do in the space of water and working towards a sustainable territory. So, of course, I think you all know the theme for this year's breakfast, and something that is very close to my heart, not just as a local member and the member for Arnhem, but as I've mentioned, with that crossover of portfolios that I hold. We all know that water is a basic human right. It is a fundamental part of living. And the foundational aspects of our broader human right for adequate shelter, and shelter without water just doesn't work. And that's why the success and the viewpoint from our Territory Labor government is that Territorians have safe, secure, clean and easy access to water. We want to ensure that that is appropriate, affordable and reliable, regardless of where you live as a Territorian. Nearly every residential property available for rent in our Territory's 73 remote Aboriginal communities is government owned. So there is a huge responsibility on us to ensure that water quality is of a high standard, accessible and reliable. So one of my biggest priorities as the Minister for Housing and Homelands is overseeing the delivery of our $2.1 billion housing package. This remote housing investment, our community, our future, our homes, is a joint investment involving the Northern Territory Government and the Australian Federal Government. And this particular package is fundamental when we're talking about addressing Aboriginal disadvantage and closing the gap. The work is targeted at reducing overcrowding in our communities, about delivering on those poor outcomes that we see in Close the Gap, and ensuring that Aboriginal Territorians don't just survive, but they thrive on country. And the challenges of poor health can be linked to the lack of adequate water supply or quality of water. Poor engagement around the opportunities for education can also have a long-term effect when we're talking about the opportunities for jobs, skilling, and work. Significant remote housing program, which is led by our government, is on the verge of delivering its 1,000th home since we came to government in September 2016. And of course, building new homes cannot happen if they do not have functioning water. They do not have sewage, we do not have power services. And the connection and the operating for those services to be of a high quality and standard. The delivery of our new homes in the bush is reliant upon the critical essential services that are delivered through our government-owned corporations. And I acknowledge we have Power and Water Corporation represented here today at the breakfast. As you can imagine, this building program is one that is well sought after across all of the 73 communities. It is one that has been faced with significant challenges over the years, but it's one that we've been able to measure and deliver upon and will continue to do so throughout this term of government. Two key areas linked to infrastructure around capacity and the condition of infrastructure is something that we've linked to the outcomes for our housing program. And we also must look at the importance, it's not always celebrated or spoken about, but serviced land. What's available and what's the potential for more land to be available. And I know many of you here in the water profession, particularly who are based and live and work here in the Territory, the importance of access to sufficient water supply is one of the single biggest constraints in looking to build new homes and bring on that new serviceable land. It's also a challenge for our providers when we come up against those severe weather events across the Northern Territory to ensure that the access to water is safe and reliable for Territorians for our existing homes. We know there are legacy issues. We know that we have outdated infrastructure. We know that the condition of this infrastructure has a roving work plan in order to upgrade and improve. And to add to that challenge, the delivery of remote services and the cost to get materials to communities can be a challenge. We all love and celebrate the unique context of the Territory, and we understand that living here does come with those sets of challenges. But again, those opportunities to overcome the challenges. Addressing things like extreme weather events through climate change, spanning the wet and the dry environments of the Territory, from the beautiful tropics of the top end right down to the arid lands of Central Australia. These constraints can impact on our ability to find water, to supply water, and to treat water to make it safe to drink. These constraints are something that we live with every day. But we do have some of those good stories. And take the example of the remote community of Laramba. For those of you who aren't familiar, Laramba is a small Aboriginal community about 2 hours drive from Alice Springs down a red dirt track. Local residents there, they knew that their water supply was not normal, and some of the water testing proved them right. Naturally occurring uranium in the Laramba bores meant that what was coming out of the taps was not of a high standard to drink. And the community needed help and they needed action. Cut forward to late last year, 2022, I was proud to announce the completion of the construction of the new ion exchange water treatment plant for Laramba. This will mean that that community can put away the bottled water that they've been drinking and start using the taps again for safe drinking water. This is modern, innovative solutions which have provided the people of Laramba with clean, safe drinking water, which they are indeed entitled to. And Laramba demonstrates that while our territory context can be quite extraordinary at times, there are solutions that we work on within the territory that we can implement to ensure Territorians have that safe access to water. When we turn to our remote essential services and we are presented with the most logistically complex of all of our essential service management across the territory. And I would say maybe some of the most challenging, complex essential services across anywhere in Australia. And we know the nature of our remote communities of being so far, often on roads such as the wet season now being cut off by that beautiful water. But also the travel and the time the cost it takes to get to our remote places. In October last year, my colleague, the Honourable Lauren Moss, MLA, in her role as the Minister for Water Security, released a draft of the Territory Water Plan. That document emphasises the critical importance of achieving safe drinking water in our remote communities. That is undoubtedly the top priority if we are to achieve water security for all Territorians. Safe drinking water is a key priority that was taken to the last election by our Territory Labor government. A high level of community feedback on the draft Territory Water Plan indeed and overwhelmingly confirms this is absolutely a shared priority for Territorians. The plan will be provided through our draft process and into the formal process to inform key policy, to inform regulation of water, the communications, the engagement activities, and to improve remote water security, as well as the introduction of a new safe drinking water legislation. And I acknowledge the Chief Executive Officer for the Department of Environment, Parks and Water Security, Jo Townsend, who is here this morning as well. The advocacy of work for organisations such as the Water Services Association of Australia is critical to ensuring that not just the Territory, but Australian jurisdictions all over have that high standard and know what is accepted and the innovation that is being shared across the country. Having an association at a national level has also confirmed for us in the Territory that our focus and priority on water security is absolutely the right path forward. After all, this will affect all Territorians, all Australians, now and into the future as we start to see those severe changes and impacts on our environment through climate change. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Mr. Adam Lovell, who will join the panel this morning, for his efforts and support and the work that you've done here in the Territory to support us on this journey. With this groundswell of consensus around the challenges of delivering services, particularly in our remote areas around water security, it's not all doom and gloom. There are those exciting new opportunities, that innovation I spoke about, with the focus of better, longer lasting and sustainable water servicing for remote communities. And this is not just a remote focus. This is now emerging in the public domain across the community. Many of you will be aware in your roles as water professionals that the Albanese government has committed to ensuring remote Aboriginal Australians are not left behind in the provision of water supply services that most of our Australian friends take for granted. The Federal Minister for Environment Water, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek MP, has announced funding for remote and regional water supplies and has been actively encouraging jurisdictions to bring forward proposals on this issue. And I know that's something Minister Moss is very passionate about. And I commend Minister Plibersek for this work. This is a very welcome commitment from the Territory. And if we are to progress, we have 3 key truths to tackle. The first, the size of the task is large, estimated to cost up to $1.5 billion over the next 10 years. The scale of funding that is required is beyond the capacity of the Northern Territory's remit to manage on our own. Second, commercial incentives are not well aligned to the process of building and operating essential services in remote Australia. As you know, the ongoing recurrent costs are significantly subsidised by the Northern Territory government, and we have the layer of Indigenous essential services. Third, we know that if Aboriginal Territorians continue to live on traditional lands, significant benefits flow from living on country. This strengthens our society and our wider Territory community with significant cultural, social, health, education and employment benefits, resulting in those positive impacts and outcomes for Aboriginal Territorians, which means a healthier nation. There is an urgency to these matters. We have to move to address some of the most urgent water security risks for our remote communities in the Territory. And the work has already been done identifying the most water stressed or at-risk water stressed communities. This work has been done to meet the need of our community infrastructure target by 2031 under the refreshed National Close the Gap Agreement. And the work to future-proof our communities, making them resilient to the effects of climate change, which we are already experiencing. To that end, I'm working closely with my colleague, Minister Moss, to finalise a significant funding proposal to the National Water Grid Authority. This builds on our existing significant programs of remote water infrastructure upgrades in our remote communities right across the Territory, those 73 that I mentioned. There's also an element of ongoing work that sits in my portfolio of housing and homelands, and that is the work on country with our 4 Aboriginal land councils to look at the sustainability and the support of homelands, again, tied to water security. The proposed program that will be put forward to the National Water Grid Authority will target priority solutions across the spectrum of water security risks over our remote communities. And it will include 4 elements. 1, improving water security and access to safe and reliable supply of water-stressed communities where currently extreme or very high water source security or quality risks exist currently. 2, delivering water supply infrastructure upgrades to ensure that we support new remote housing to reduce overcrowding. 3, addressing extreme water losses and critical capacity and condition issues by tackling legacy water infrastructure issues. And 4, improving communities' resilience to climate change impacts, again by focusing on water losses. Again, it sounds like gloom and doom, but we are living in exciting times. These opportunities to deliver a comprehensive response to remote water security challenges are here now in our own backyard. And we are ready to work with the Commonwealth Government, with those innovative solutions and industry, and of course, our NGOs who advocate strongly for better services right across the Territory. This joint collaboration and the focus on a strong program around water security will make a difference. We know that Aboriginal Territorians have a strong interest in water management, and we will be delivering our program and supporting actions in a way that meaningfully engages across the Aboriginal community controlled sector. And this has already been established through the existing mechanisms of the Northern Territory Closing the Gap governance arrangements, which involve the Aboriginal peak organisations of the Northern Territory who represent all of those peak bodies in the Aboriginal community controlled sector, as well as the 4 Aboriginal land councils. We know that this approach needs to improve water literacy in our remote communities, and it needs to support local decision making. It must provide real job opportunities for Aboriginal Territorians on country in order to participate in the social and economic infrastructure delivery for their communities. And I note Power and Water Corporation has done a very exciting piece of work, which is working with communities around identifying water leakage and water waste, and doing that through a cultural and language lens to be able to pass on and to enhance the education around water priority. I must say a big thank you for your time this morning. I hope I brought a different perspective to what you would expect at the NT Water Breakfast. It is an exciting opportunity to connect in with areas that you may not necessarily think about in your current professions, and the link and the impact that it has across the Territory. And of course, we love the collaboration across our nation when it comes to water. Water is life, and Auntie B explained it beautifully in her Welcome to Country. I do look forward to learning more from the water industry and professionals who can help to guide the work and the journey we are on here in the Territory. These significant programs that we are committed to in the Territory will deliver safe and secure drinking water for our remote communities. I do wish you all the best for the rest of the morning, and particularly the panel discussion, where you'll be able to have some of that really interesting deep dive discussion and the sharing and collaboration across the industry. Thank you so much for your efforts to promote, create, and sustain the future of water in the Northern Territory. Have a good morning.
Hello? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Minister Uibo, for that insightful speech. We will now move on to our panel discussion. So I'd like to invite panel facilitator, Natalie Fries, and our panel members, Adam Lovell, Stephen Porter, and Rowan Riley.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you to Minister Uibo. And as Kruti said, my name's Natalie Fries, and I'm going to facilitate this panel for us this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Larrakia people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I feel very privileged to live on Larrakia country and raise my family here. I'd also like to thank the Australian Water Association for the invitation to facilitate this panel, so thank you. And also just to acknowledge everyone in the room who works in the water industry. You know, there's been a lot of sustained and long-term effort to provide water services to Territory communities, and you know, there's been amazing work done by so many of you in the room for so long, and it's really great to see momentum continuing in this space. So thank you all, and a bit of a shout out to those at the Alice Springs Hub as well. So as Kruti said, we've got three excellent panelists here. We're joined by Adam Lovell from Water Services Association of Australia. And Adam, I think we might start with you to kick the panel off, if you don't mind. So, so first of all, just acknowledging the motivation that came from WASA to produce the Closing the Water for People and Communities gap report. And I want to understand what motivated WASA to undertake that report. And then the second part of my question is, since the release of the report, I understand you've been getting around the country, talking to a lot of people, picking up those themes of innovation that the minister spoke about. So I'd like to hear, what you've been hearing from the ground.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks,
sure. Right. And thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm really, really pleased to be here. I was down in Perth on Wednesday, speaking to Water Corporation and DY down there about this issue as well. This is the report that Natalie was referring to. It's on our website. I've got a couple of copies if people want a hard copy. It's a culmination, and a big shout out to the author, Eric van Vaderveld, who many of you in the room will know. Eric's now down in Canberra, and first came across Eric as he completed the upgrade of the treatment out at Borroloola, and I went out to Borroloola for the opening of that, and just struck by his tremendous project management skills to get that completed. But just going back to your question, it's sort of, I guess it's been on the radar for WASA for quite a while, but really started off probably around 2015, 16 about trying to gather some information and some go forward at a national level on the back of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that really, sort of woke up the industry, I guess. If we're making commitments to strive towards the Sustainable Development Goals, well, what are we actually doing? And I think the one clear thing that came straight away out of the data was that we know pretty much what's happening at a capital city level and at the larger regionals. We didn't know anything about remote services at all. And it really came home towards 2019, 2020, when Infrastructure Australia was doing its 5-year infrastructure plan for Australia. They always do a chapter on water. And at the same time, the Productivity Commission was doing its review, triennial assessment of the National Water Initiative. And both parties, WASA was obviously that national link to a lot of federal government departments, and both parties came and said, we don't have any information. You know what? And I guess actually out of sheer frustration, out of so many years of being asked the same question, and knowing that as an industry and government had made commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals, we've got to understand this. We've got to be able to pick up that rock and have a look what's underneath it and try and understand it. So rather unambitiously or ambitiously, I asked Eric to produce a short report. And those of you who have looked up, you will know that it's now 400 pages on the website. This is just a summary report. I was expecting, something like 10 or 20 pages in a month. But anyway, as we got into the issue and started working with our members and with state government departments, NIAA, quite a few of the federal government departments as well, is that there was a real groundswell here of change, of that we can do things better. And we've written this report with a view to the future. So very little blame or finger pointing, because that's just a complete waste of time. We've tried to set out in here a very high level future, what the future should look like, could look like, but what needs to be done. And so, of course, we were over the moon with the announcement from the federal government on Sunday night, Monday morning. But I did remind Tony Plibersek's advisor that we did actually say out loud that we would think a minimum of 2.2 billion across the country is a level of investment required. So 150 million, of course, very welcome. And we hope that that's just the first step in the journey to the investment that's required. I think some key things out of this report too that I'd just like to, and we can explore this a little bit more, is federal government, of course, hands out funds for capital, the shiny stuff, the ribbon snipping stuff. But this doesn't, we all know in this room, it doesn't work without the human side, without the people side. And so we're putting together a program now where we're really focusing on what's the people side look like? What does the skills and capability, how do we offer opportunities for First Nations businesses to grow? do we know enough about maybe less on that, but do we know the climate risks attached and what that means for water security? I know it's been done to death for the capital cities, but it doesn't help remote communities. So there are quite a few programs here that we are suggesting need to go absolutely hand in hand with this capital funding that's been put in place to ensure that it's sustainable into the future. We all know and want this to happen sustainably, that this has got a long life. There's a lot of money attached to it, and it's incumbent on all of us in some way, shape or form to make sure it's successful. So that's just a little bit of an intro, but and I can explore it. So following the launch of the report, and just quickly, so we're over the moon that Minister Burney could actually launch the report in Parliament House, and we had Pam Jackie came down from Alpha to talk about their story out there. And I must admit, we had probably 200 people there, and a lot of people had never heard, that didn't even understand some of the issues. And were sort of, the jaws were sort of, heard dropping onto the floor as they heard some of these stories. So we've shone the light on it. Minister Burney has really taken it upon herself to really forward this in her agenda. And those of you who might have heard her speak in Parliament House in the Closing the Gap or the anniversary of the Stolen Generations apology, she actually opened her speech on the basis of clean, safe drinking water. So it's really stuck with her. This is a fantastic thing. So we've started in a great place. I think it's all of us as a gigantic team effort. And again, I would like to shout out to the many, many people. I would like to think that we're maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, but there are a lot of straws in that back. There are a lot of people in this room, online, and around the country that have been working in this space tirelessly to see some action happen. So a big shout out to everybody. I can't name you all, but a big shout to everybody and those people in the room here who have actually contributed to this. So if we've been able to help make things happen, I'm extremely happy. But it is a massive team effort. Everybody in the room. I'll hand over at that point. Sorry, guys.
No, that's wonderful, Adam, and it's really great to see the groundswell and that this report's created for this sector and well overdue. So next I'll introduce Rowan Riley. So Rowan is the Director of the Office of Water Security here in the Northern Territory for the Northern Territory Government. And he's been leading the Office of Water Security for the past 18 months. So, Rowan, what we'd really like to hear from you is, what's the Office of Water Security's focus areas to address the recommendations of the Closing the Gap for Water report in the NT?
Thanks, Natalie, and thanks for having me here this morning. Yeah, it does feel weird for me too, being here at Water Professionals Breakfast. I'm probably still kicking myself a bit that I've only been around for 5 minutes in the Office of Water Security, 18 months, probably the same. But I know a lot of people in this room have had long careers in water already. So I'm definitely still learning, but I'm coming here from a public policy perspective, I guess. And that's the role of the Office of Water Security since it was established in 2020, was to start delivering a whole of government strategic policy on water, including water services, essential services in the bush, and coordination across government, because what we had in the past, I think, was much more siloed effort across water resource management, water services, and the other aspects of water that touch across government. So our first task was to develop the Territory Water Plan, which we've nearly finished doing, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen the draft plan, which we released in October last year. And as Minister Uibo mentioned, we're now in the process of finalising that through government. So we're nearly there, but that's just the first step. And then it's a matter of implementing a range of actions underneath the plan. And Adam, when you spoke before about what are the programs to go with the shiny capital projects in the Territory context, the Territory Water Plan hits a lot of those bases. So we have a range of actions there. When the government put forward its 2020 election platform that talked about establishing the Office of Water Security and doing the Territory Water Plan, safe drinking water was the #1 priority in that platform. And I think since the time I've been here and through the development of the Territory Water Plan, that groundswell of consensus around the importance of safe drinking water has come through in the territory as well. So we've really put a strong focus on it in the draft Territory Water Plan. There's a range of actions in there, from safe drinking water legislation, improved remote engagement, improved communication about remote infrastructure priorities, efforts in homelands as well to improve capacity and improve the condition of water supply infrastructure there as well. Climate resilience. There's a suite of actions under the plan. So we're looking to provide that wraparound support for the capital as well. Might stop there.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Our next panelist, and just before we jump to Stephen, I would just remind everyone to pop onto the Slido and upvote your panel questions or enter your questions, because we'll move to the open panel session fairly soon. So it would be good to get your views on what you'd like to hear next. So Stephen, welcome. So Stephen is the Executive General Manager of Water Services at Param Water Corporation. And, you know, Stephen, I really want to acknowledge all the amazing work that Param Water Corp has done in this area over decades and decades, and really been, you know, an industry leader nationally on some of the programs and initiatives that have been implemented to improve water security for Territorians and remote communities. But I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about what some of the recent programs are that Param Water have been focusing on this area, and what's coming up, what's in the pipeline.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Natalie. And before I start, I would like to just acknowledge the work that Adam and Wazra have been doing in terms of advocating on behalf of remote communities. It's a fantastic piece of work, and it's great to see the passion that you bring to this particular task, Adam. So thanks very much. So a little bit of perspective, you know, Param Water, through its fully owned subsidiary, Indigenous Essential Services, we cover 72 remote communities and 17 outstations, and they're dotted across 1.3 million square kilometres, or 17% of Australia. So a fair challenge when you think of just the sheer logistics, which Minister Uibo also spoke about earlier. And one of the recent experiences we had with it, you know, one of our small communities was isolated by floodwater. It was running out of chlorine because it had been isolated for, you know, a couple of months. And we were faced with the challenge of trying to get chlorine drums over 1,000 kilometres by road train to the small community. And the perspective on this is, when you think of the distances, is that, you know, the International Space Station is only 420 kilometres above the Earth, and we're transporting chlorine over 1,000 kilometres. So it starts to provide a little bit of perspective just of the, you know, the challenges that you face in dealing with remote communities. And with through Indigenous Essential Services, we're fully funded through the NT government. We receive an annual operating allowance. We have an asset replacement program. We have a rolling capital program. We have a headworks program which supports the government's $1 billion housing work. So there's a number of opportunities for us to, you know, work in different areas through several different areas. We're also working with Rowan through the NIAA and the National Water Grid Authority. So the funding becomes really important to the service delivery that we're delivering. So our two key focus areas are water quality and water security. It's pretty clear. It's referenced through the minister and through many other areas. These are the essential services that we're seeking to provide to the communities. And in providing, you know, things like good water quality, you've got to have a good foundation. And we've been putting a lot of time and effort into the drinking water quality management system. And we're quite pleased that, you know, the people involved in that one, it was acknowledged by recently being awarded a AWA Organisational Excellence Award. So it's great to see the work that people, and Liz Gadd at the back has been a real driver of this. So it's great to see the time and effort and commitment that our people put into the foundational work. But building on top of that, you know, you look at the various programs and in the water quality area, and Minister Uibo referenced it also, the work we've been doing out at Laramba. So this particular community, it did have high levels of naturally occurring uranium in the drinking water, and through the rolling capital program, funds were made available to start addressing that problem. So we have just finished in the process of commissioning a $7 million ion exchange water treatment plant in Laramba. The test results are just sensational. The uranium levels have gone down to below detectable levels. So this is a situation that was significantly important to the community and to us. And it's great to see the outcome that we can actually, through the technology and the funding, deliver improved outcomes on behalf of the community. It's a sensational result. I'd certainly like to acknowledge our construction partners, Cleantech, who really, put heart and soul into getting this project from concept to delivery within a 12-month period. Fantastic piece of work. We have multiple projects underway in the water security area. There was some reference also about the scale of leakage in some of the systems that we have out there. And we recently completed a $3 million project out of the Nooka community. What we'd identified through our investigations is that up to 90% of the water that we were producing was being lost, through leakages in the network and on the customer side. So you think, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into producing the water and then leaking out. So through that investment, we ended up saving for that community over 300 megalitres per year of water. And that was water that was going to waste, which can now be rediverted to improve lifestyles and also economic growth through that area. So here's our infrastructure, and investment in infrastructure and targeting the work can really benefit the communities. If we can provide good, safe water and good sanitation, it really sets the foundation, for improved well-being in the communities, and also the economic growth, which we've referenced in terms of how do we help the communities help themselves. And that's the work that we can do. It's what we're invested in, and certainly through the work that Rowan and DPAWS have been doing with a submission to the National Water Grid Authority, that could also be a real game changer, to have those funds available and to help more communities actually get ahead. It's certainly one of the things that gets me out of bed in the morning, to think that we are at a pivotal moment in time where we can actually help one of the most disadvantaged group of Australians. So it's really quite inspirational. It's great to have the help and support of others in that area. So to go to the question, we have multiple projects, Natalie. They're just two of the recent ones which have been really significant. And if we can get the additional funding, we can replicate that across many other communities. And so this becomes really significant in what we can do to help close the gap.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I have another question, open question for the panel before we move to the ones coming in from the Slido. So I am very interested to hear one of the recommendations, and it is inherent in any undertakings to achieve solutions for First Nations people, is nothing for us without us. So I'm keen to hear how the voices of the affected Indigenous people and communities are going to be included in the decisions and plans regarding this water supplies, and keen to hear from any of the panelists around some things you might have heard around the country, Adam, around what's happening or how community engagement's happening, Stephen. What Power and Water are doing, and Rowan, what in terms of those soft measures that include the voice. Thank you. Whoever would like to go first.
Okay, I'll start. And I'll give you more of a perspective about what I'm hearing around the country. And it is different, but it's the same. But for instance, just talking to West Australian colleagues over the past couple of months as well, many of you will know that with the REST program, 141 communities are coming back into the management of Water Corporation. So there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes. So Horizon Power and Water Corporation are sort of getting themselves geared up for that to happen. But there's a lot of so for instance, there's a lot of expectation we're hearing from communities that things are really going to get better very quickly. And so I think both Water Corporation and Horizon Power are feeling the heat there, that it's going to, there'll be instantaneous change. So it goes to the point about engagement, that what's sort of real, and even then having done a lot of radio since the announcement. I've done a lot of radio interviews, particularly in Western Australia, from up in the Kimberley. The questions I was receiving sort of really bring you back to earth. It's people on the ground saying, well, when will the water quality improve? Is Water Corporation going to come out on day one and talk to us? So there's a feeling there of expectation. I think the other thing, if I flip onto the other side into Queensland, particularly for the northern Queensland and the Indigenous councils, is an element where they're just trying to sort of collaborate amongst themselves. So there's alliances that are pulling together. But I guess the feeling I have is that there's still a lot of work to be done, that the councils are still operating quite individually. They do try and share where they can, but even that willingness of community members to share their troubles is a really strong issue that's coming through in North Queensland. So that's just a perspective. I've got two fantastic professionals who know much more about what's happening on the ground here, so I'll let them speak about Northern Territory, but there's a couple of perspectives from other parts of the country.
Thank you, Adam.
I might go next, and I rattled off a bunch of actions from the Territory Water Plan before, but a number of those actions are really geared towards engagement with Aboriginal communities and giving them a stronger voice in what's happening in their communities, how their water security is managed. And I'll start off with safe drinking water legislation. So when we introduce that, we'll be introducing a compliance obligation for all water service providers, including Parham Water and other smaller service providers across the Territory, to introduce drinking water management plans. Parham Water already does that and does it well. But an aspect of those drinking water management plans will be engagement and communication with the community about how risks are currently being managed and how we're going to improve the water security over time and the management of those risks. So that's the first thing that will happen. Or even before that legislation is in place, we'll be working on another action around the wraparound support for the infrastructure work, which is about improving remote engagement and communication. So while Parham Water already goes out and talks to communities that are severely water stressed or where they're undertaking projects, that sort of happens selectively and on a prioritised basis. And what we're proposing is that we're going to go out together and across government to talk to communities about all their water security issues and with all the necessary parts of government there, so that we're collectively hearing together from community what the issues are, because sometimes what people from Parham Water might hear may not filter back to the Department of Infrastructure or to our department. So we want to make sure we do that in a more coordinated fashion and do it together. And the other thing we're going to do as part of that is we're going to focus on providing more public information about infrastructure priorities, and so communities can understand if we're not getting some new pipes tomorrow, when might we be getting it, or what are our risks that need to be managed and what are the options around infrastructure solutions. And sometimes infrastructure may not be the necessary solution in the short term. So that's a really key part of what we want to do under the Territory Water Plan. We do also have actions for homelands where we want to, we're proposing to top up some grant funding to help them improve the condition and capacity of their water supply infrastructure, and that's necessary to meet the obligations that we'll introduce under safe drinking water legislation. But we're also looking to build the capacity of those service providers that deliver those water services to homelands as well. So that's some more work that we'll be doing that goes to the people issue that you're talking about, Adam. A further thing that we're going to be doing, which I think all these things start to converge on each other, but we have another action around climate resilience across the Territory and with a water security lens. And I think the key focus when we get into that will be around drinking water supply in remote communities. And as we talked a little bit about before, reducing water losses is perhaps one resilience measure that we can deliver for remote communities. But I think what we'll be doing as we undertake a risk assessment, and we'd like to work with communities as well on adaptation planning, so we can talk about other ways to build their resilience to climate change as well. And one more I might mention is work that's not going to be undertaken by us, but will be undertaken by our colleagues in Department of Treasury and Finance, which is around some economic regulatory reforms to water service providers, and that's about improving transparency and accountability and customer protections, and again across the board for all water service providers in the Territory.
Excellent things to hear, Rowan, and over to Stephen.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rowan. And yeah, certainly through the Territory Water Plan, there is some significant communication engagement work being planned over the next couple of years. At the practical level and what we're doing at the moment, our demand management group developed and implementing some really culturally appropriate water education, water information sessions, and working closely with communities in terms of understanding their needs and how they can help themselves in terms of addressing leakages internally through the houses and the use of water. So that's a really significant program of work that's rolling on and really does work at the coalface in terms of understanding the needs and helping people understand the importance of water as well. So that's an ongoing program which is really delivering some significant benefits. And then again, at a really practical level, when we do go out and look to implement a project, we have a very well experienced team that look at the engagement with the community before we actually enter into the community. What are the cultural aspects that we need to be aware of on a community by community basis? And so that really does give people an opportunity to have a say in terms of how we actually deliver a program of work, understanding, are there culturally sensitive areas or days coming up? And so that's been really powerful as well. And, the level of engagement is really at the, at the heart of each community. So we do talk about, engagement at, perhaps a macro level. But when we come to do the projects, we really do work at the micro level, and people do feel really engaged in being able to have a say in just how we actually deliver projects on the ground. So it becomes really powerful in that, giving people an opportunity to have a voice when we actually come to do the work in their communities.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah,
can I just add, it just made me think while Rowan and Steve were speaking, one of the concepts that we've been talking to the federal government about is a good practice engagement guide. Because of the differences that we see across the country, SA Water and the government departments down there have got a different sort of program, different sort of approach to WA, to here, to North Queensland, and so I think there's an element there of a good practice type guide, because we hear from both First Nations peoples and communities about the differences that they see as well. And I guess it goes back to, is there something there about a sort of national sharing, a national network to get things going relatively quickly? And so I'm really keen from a WASP perspective, how can we help everybody, not just members, obviously, but everybody pull together to really share and collaborate, because there's expertise and learnings from across the country, which you probably don't hear about. But if we can provide that mechanism, even in the research and innovation space, because that should be shared nationally as well, then I think that's only a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, some real interesting notes there from our panelists, hearing from Rowan about the work that Department of Treasury and Finance are looking at, hearing from Stephen about the ongoing good work of Power and Water and across nationally. And when we were having a bit of a chat preparing for the panel, you talked to me a bit about the Water Ranger concept. Do you want to just talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, it's one that's been developed out of WA. It's a really interesting concept where they've been thinking about, I guess, employment or engagement with communities and having community members involved with not just water supply. So not being taught, for instance, how to operate a chlorinator or something like that, that they actually become a ranger for that community for everything to do with water. And so there's elements of environment, there's elements of sanitation, there's obviously elements of drinking water supply as well. And it's a way, because there's a lot of different type ranger programs across the country, but all of an element of being on country, culturally sensitive, community sensitive. And it's really got a lot of legs out of WA at the moment, this concept of a water ranger. And just speaking last week to the Cape York Alliance, they're really interested in that sort of approach as well. So I'd love to be able to share that with you as we sort of talk about that concept a little bit more. It's just a different take. It's a different look on engaging communities in water overall.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think we might go to an open questions coming from the Slido, Kruti. So are you going to pop them up on the screen? No, that was my understanding. Just on the phone. Right. Good. No, that's fine. I thought we were going to get a, yeah. I have it open. That one. All right, wonderful. So the first question is coming from Jimmy Cocking, and he wants to ask, how can we grow the capacity and capability of First Nation people to manage their own water services? I think we've been speaking to about this a bit already, but what is IES doing to grow training and employment opportunities? So probably one for you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. So IES, through its raft of programs, we have a obligation that in any of our projects in remote communities, there's a 40% Aboriginal participation requirement. So when we go out to those Aboriginal communities, we're obligated to involve Aboriginal people in the construction. So through the companies we engage, they engage Aboriginal people who then develop the opportunity to get skills in the construction and project area. So that's very hands-on. It's very community specific, and certainly that's the main aspect where we work with our service providers to facilitate the development of Aboriginal people.
Thanks. Anyone else like to join?
Yeah, I might just pick up on that as well. And I think, well, if and when we secure an investment from the Commonwealth for remote infrastructure going forward, and what we're looking for is a fairly significant program, and as Adam talked about, it's a large problem that's going to require sustained effort over the next 10 years. And I think having that steady pipeline of work through a large program provides a great opportunity to develop the Aboriginal community controlled sector within the water portfolio. So that's something that we'll look to do systematically through that program once we get the funding and we get into planning for program delivery, I think. And I think also I didn't mention before in talking about the Territory Water Plan, obviously we want to align closely with the Closing the Gap priority reforms in the engagement work that we do with remote communities. And one of those priority reforms is about improving the capacity of the Aboriginal community controlled sector. So I think that'll be a core piece of work for the Office of Water Security as the whole of government policy coordinator and sort of external engagement hub that will be looking to work closely through the Closing the Gap framework with sort of key Aboriginal stakeholder organisations, and then out across the community to look for opportunities to grow that. Because I don't think it won't happen overnight, but it's something that, again, will require sustained effort and a bit of a plan to achieve. But obviously with some of the other NT government policies around local decision-making and treaty on the horizon, obviously there is possibilities in the future of more Aboriginal communities running their own water services. But as I say, I think it's a fair journey to get there, and we need to map out the right steps to get there.
Thanks, Ryan.
A couple of perspectives on this too, that we're actually got a joint board meeting dinner actually coming up between the WASA and the AWA boards, speaking about skills, but speaking out skills across the country, not just capital city skills, actually more towards regional and remote. And so the thing that I've noticed over the past past decade, but particularly now, is that many industries have got strategies and positions out there about how they're going to bring on skills, how they're going to train the existing workforce that they have, but bring on new skills into the workforce as well. Clean energy, all of these different industries, but we don't in water. We don't actually have a story. We don't have a strategy. And so that's where we're keen to get together with the AWA to put that joint water industry strategy to government. And part of that, very specifically, we had a meeting of about 20 people from around the country a couple of weeks ago, speaking about, in particular, water treatment operators and the skills required for that, and the fact that there are very few registered training organisations that are left, and just the dire state of training water treatment operators the way it is. So we need to pick that up. I don't have an answer for it immediately, but we actually need to provide a lot of attention in that space, which will translate into training of community members here, but it's culturally sensitive. And the other aspect to that, which I'd like to add, is that I was in touch quite a lot with some of the contractors that work out of Broome for Water Corporation and government, actually, Department of Community, about some of the services, and they're First Nations run organisations. And what they're keen to see is government sort of moves away from sort of a statutory number of First Nations people will be involved in a certain number of contracts. So, he basically said to me, I don't want people sitting at the side of the road flipping around a stop go sign. I want them to develop skills, but under the current government processes, it's a ticker box type activity that they're employed, sure, but they're not actually learning anything new. They're not developing those skills. So I think, again, there's a vision, that there's something that we know that we can strive to do a little bit better on collectively.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. We might move to another question. And this one is probably, it's policy related, Rowan, so probably one for you, but there is the challenge, and there is conflicting policy areas between industry and economic development and environment and culture and social. So how will this be managed? And I think, that's kind of, the coordination piece. You got that one?
Professor.
Professor.
Water just goes everywhere, and I think we found that when we were developing the Territory Water Plan, and as we were trying to put together the framework in it, it was really difficult, and it was challenging discussions across government, I think, as well, about how you strike a balance between economic development and social considerations and environmental considerations. And I think, it's challenging from the position in our department as well, where we're often seen as being the custodians of environmental protection, and that we have to bring that lens. But certainly in our Territory Water Plan and in a water security perspective, it is really about balancing those interests. And of course, safe drinking water should always come first. And that's the way that our plans come together and the government's policy works. But we will still also maintain that balance of looking at water for economic development, water for the environment, water for cultural reasons. Of course, those things don't have to be either or. And I think, particularly in thinking about safe drinking water for remote communities, the government investment that goes into it, the economic development that flows from that infrastructure delivery activity, that's providing economic development benefits. It's also about bringing the whole territory with us, in that and that's the whole point of closing the gap as well, is that if we want to achieve a $40 billion economy, as the government is targeting, and we want the support of our community to do that, and to unlock water across the territory to achieve that goal, we also have to bring our remote communities with us and improve their standard of living and improve their livability and their opportunities to engage with that development as well.
Thank you so much. And I guess, the complexity of water is why so many of us do like working in this space. But thank you, Rowan. We'll go to some more specific questions. So there's a question here around, what was the political will that got Laramba's water treatment plant funded and now constructed, and what lessons can be taken from this, from the WA team, who have got a community called Kiwikara, who is in the eastern part of the Western Desert. It's very, very remote. For lessons on how they can achieve something for Kiwikara.
Yeah, great. And to go back to the Laramba project, it was one of those communities that had been identified that something that you'd done there for a while. And I pass on full credit to the then Minister for Indigenous Essential Services, Minister Paik, who is also the local member out in that community, that he basically came to us and to the department and said we need to do something about these most water stressed communities, including Laramba, and that was the genesis for the 28 million 4-year rolling capital program. So this is where it was a on ground local member driven initiative, which has had fantastic repercussions right across the communities, not just in his own area, in terms of giving us access to funds to actually allow us to deliver on projects. And it's interesting that it's the WA representative on this one, because we actually got the idea on the Iron Exchange from a small West Australian community, Andy Yarra, who had actually implemented this some years ago. So we actually went out there to have a look at it. We learned a lot from what had been done out there, and we picked up a lot of those lessons. So it's one of the really fantastic things about the water industry is just the collaboration that's freely given, that helps us move ahead. So we took the lessons from that one, and that was how we were able to deliver it within a 12-month period. So really, the genesis was that political will, and full credit to the government and Minister Paik, for saying we need to do something about it, and then making the funds available that then let us do it. So that was how that started.
Thank you so much. And I guess, one of the next kind of cabs off the rank of focus is Yuendamu with their water security issues. And we do have a question around, what is happening for Yuendamu's water supply.
I'm glad you asked that question, Natalie. Yuendamu is actually, it has been in the papers for a lot of the wrong reasons. But when I've had the chance to go to that particular community, I've really been struck by, the community-driven aspiration to do better. We went down there to talk about some of their water security issues, and what the community presented back to us was quite a long list of economic development ideas that they'd come up with. And that really inspired me to say, well, look, if we can actually give them the water, this community can then take control of their own destiny. They can progress the economic development. Economic leads to jobs, leads to better well-being, leads to perhaps something that could address some of the other issues that are in that area. So we've taken that one on board. If water security is the issue, we do have access to bores. We've got access, we've identified some good sources through, the submission to the National Water Grid Authority. We've put in a bid to actually address that and promote that. It doesn't come cheap. There's a few dollars involved in it, but if we are successful, and we actually put it up as one of the top 2 projects that we were seeking funding for. So we see Yuendamu can be one of those really good news stories if we can get the funds to deliver on the water security.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And good luck with the funding submission. There is a question here, and I guess, all of us working in the water space know it is a finite resource. And so the question is around, what sort of initiatives are in place to protect the finite groundwater resources, in particular in Central Australia? Maybe one for you, Rowan, potentially around overall.
Maybe I'll segue back to our National Water Grid funding proposal and just zoom in again on the water losses issue. So obviously we have lots of communities where we are drawing from a water source. It may have a finite life. There's a lot of uncertainty about that as well. So that's part of the risk management profile of what Power and Water does. Is quite complex in how they've managed those risks in some of those arid environments. But what we do want to do through this funding proposal is one of the key program elements, as the Minister was talking about, is addressing water losses. That's really important for sustainability of those communities, that if we can reduce those losses over time, we're prolonging the life of those communities. Whether it's finite or infinite, we obviously don't know, probably more likely finite, but we're extending that life and improving that sustainability. It's never going to be perfect, and humans continue to have an impact on the environment over time, but that's something that we do want to improve.
Excellent, thank you. probably have a couple more questions from the Slido. So one of them relates to something that Minister Uibo raised in her speech this morning around the recurrent costs and how, you know, these aren't recovered commercially. And this question relates to, you know, to how the operational costs will be funded going forward, and potentially how that's been covered under the submission or not. Anyone take up?
I'll take this one as well. So we have spoken to the water grid, and I'm sure lots of others have, to say, look, it is a bit unfair. This is always what the Commonwealth does. It does invest in the infrastructure, and it does come with an expectation that state and territory governments will pick up the operational costs of that. So yeah, it is a bit of a challenge and a flaw in the logic of how you start an investment process. Is it a sustainable investment if you don't have the operational funds there? But that is something that I think we will emerge over time through a new national water reform agenda. I think that will be part of the mix in how do we sustainably resource remote water utilities. I think the other thing is that as we design the program, we will also be thinking carefully about the sustainability and the OPEX costs of the solutions that we want to deploy. So again, another advantage of focusing on water losses is if we're fixing pipes, those things don't come with increased OPEX necessarily. So where possible, we're going to want to try and avoid expensive OPEX solutions. We're still going to need them in some places, but we'll work through that as part of the program logic.
And I'd just say I've been working hard, as Rowan knows, I've been working hard at a federal level, trying to, almost begging them to think differently about the way they might fund these things. But, you know, they're terribly stuck on certain rules that they've got to stick to. So I'll just keep hammering away. And I think, as Rowan said, there is the renewal of the National Water Initiative on the table. And what can we actually build around that? I think is absolutely live option, because I think that this sort of very structured sort of approaches and thinking is not the future. It can't be the future. So yeah, there's plenty to work on, but I'm trying my best at a federal level to ask them to think differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, in terms of the, you know, we talked about a $1.5 billion need and you know, allocations of capital funding or some funding doesn't allow for those broader achievements of, you know, employment and regional development and all of those things to be bedded down. So go your hardest, Adam. So I think we've almost come to the end of the questions. So I'd like to just sort of take us through some of the things that we've heard, and hopefully you've all picked up some items of interest for your work. But, you know, we have heard this morning, as announced on Sunday, that there is, you know, renewed investment and renewed focus coming from the federal government into water security. We've heard that it's absolutely a priority of the NT government and the acknowledgement of all the work done to date. We've heard that, you know, the engagement with Indigenous communities and having their voice in the picture is fundamental to the success of that. And that's not just happening at a national level, but at a territory level. And also that the coordination piece around government agencies and sector service providers needs to be coordinated. That's acknowledged, and that there's processes in place that are starting to pull that coordination together on top of the organic grassroots coordination that does happen. And we've heard some wonderful examples of that from the panel. Interesting to hear about the legislation changes for water quality and also the reform that Department of Treasury and Finance is talking about to really lock down some of these changes. Excellent to hear about these things. I find the Closing the Gap initiative around infrastructure has been a long time coming, and it's here now, and using that to really drive some of these outcomes is well overdue, but excellent to see. Rowan, hearing about the Aboriginal controlled organisation sector and what they're doing and the potential for growth in that area, I think is is something that is really positive, and yeah, I would like to hear more and see how that progresses, particularly different models that are successful and how that's being applied, and allowing those organisations to grow and develop in that space, and not too much too soon. The water industry skills and training, what you were speaking about, Adam, it's excellent to see the national approach there and how that plays out in the territory. We're really awesome. And I guess just a focus on that reduction in losses. And I like to hear, yes, it's capital, but not always OPEX required to achieve some of those things. And that priority thinking, and that thinking about where can we target, best dollars for best outcome, both securing up the water resource and the supply. It's really excellent thinking. So yeah, I'd like to thank you all for the conversation and for your hard work and diligence, and once again thank Australian Water Association for the opportunity to facilitate. Right, that's
of when you're faced with them. So thank you once again to all of you for joining us this morning, and in particular to the NT Branch Committee Working Group for pulling this together. Natalie Fries for facilitating the panel discussion, our panel, Adam, Rowan, Stephen, Auntie Billawarra Lee, and the Honourable Selena Uibo. Thank you also to our webinar sponsor, Oricon, and our Alice Springs hub partner, Achistica. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you all of the NT Water Awards, which will open for nomination in June. We had a great number of entries the last couple of years, and we would love to see your projects and people nominated in this year's awards. So yes, start thinking now, and I'm sure you'll continue to hear from us as those open. Ozwater 23 is shaping up to be our biggest event yet. So we're opening 2 additional streams. Our exhibition has sold at, got 250 exhibitors, and there are lots of networking opportunities. So early bird registrations close on the 31st of March. And our 2022 NT Water Award winners are in the running for the national awards, and we wish them all the best. So you can see them up there. If you are interested in nominating for the NT Branch Committee, nominations will open in April. I highly recommend it. You don't always have to stand up in front of people. There are lots of other ways to support the committee. And we will be holding a sundowner in both Alice Springs and Darwin, and we'll have a mentoring program as well. They will both be in June, so please keep an eye out. That brings us to the end of the formalities this morning. The tea and coffee facilities are still available in the foyer until 10 a.m. if you wanted to continue on the conversation. Thank you.